because this is the first time that I've really done something that I know virtually nothing about. This is kind of why I wanted to host this. This is pretty much, I'm here to learn. That's why you'll see me as the facilitator role today, not as the presenter. And to the point where it was really highlighted when we put this together, and I think I said to Kristen, this is great, we're going to do a 50-year anniversary of the Brassknocker farm, and I kind of just didn't carry the 10. We're 39, nearly 50, but it's still a long time, and it's long enough, and part of the reason why I thought this would be particularly interesting is it's long enough that it's in some people's memories still, and we have other landowners that have come and passed through that weren't here when this easement was put in place in different parcels, and it may even be their land. And so it's kind of it's at the point where it needs to be remembered before it's forgotten. So that's the purpose of today. And we have 3 great presenters, and I'll introduce each presenter as they come up. But the idea is to get an understanding of what this conservation project was. And I know there's people in the room that were a part of this. And so at the end, we'll also just have a discussion, and that'll be the chance to share in questions. So save your questions till the end, and then we'll bring up the 3 presenters hanging out here in the front, and they'll have a chance to answer everyone's questions. So we're going to start off today with a quick background overview from Clarice Cutler, who is the project director for Vermont Land Trust, serving central Vermont and the Northeast Kingdom. She works with farmers on new conservation projects throughout the region, and is the stewardship point of contact for much of Vermont VLT's conserved lands in Craftsbury and Greensboro. Prior to VLT, Clarice worked on water quality projects for Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. So first, we're going to have Clarice come and give us that background of what are we actually talking about today. But before you come up, I did forget to also thank the church for hosting us here today, and also thank for Tom and his crew for providing the assistance in recording this, and also the sound and everything else. So thank you all. And with that, please welcome Clarice up here to give us the background.
Well, thanks, Jared, and thanks everybody for having me tonight. My name is Clarice Cutler. Clarice rhymes with Paris. And yeah, I'm excited to talk to you all tonight. I've been working for Vermont Land Trust for 3 years, so I'm still getting to know the Brassknocker parcel and the Brassknocker landowners. Sorry, I'm getting signals to speak louder. Is there a way to turn up the mic? Okay, I'll just hold it. Yeah, so I'm here to learn as well, like Jared. I'm really grateful for Cheryl being willing to present today. I'm going to learn a lot. I'm also really grateful to the landowners who are in the audience and folks who are part of the early development of this project, some folks from the steering committee here, so that's really cool. So yeah, I'll be quick. I'm just going to give us the basic general features of the property. Let's see if I can walk over here without getting in the way. To just really generally get our bearings here, we're talking about a 770 plus acre property in and around the village of East Craftsbury. It has a lot of road frontage on East Craftsbury Road, Whetstone Brook Road, and Shadow Lake Road. The highest point is right there, which is Kate Hill. It's about 1,700 feet. And the Whetstone Brook runs through this property. There's about 4 miles of river frontage through the Brassknocker property. A lot of important riparian wetlands along the Whetstone Brook. Much of the property is forested, but there's some important agricultural land as well. You can see in this soils map, sorry, it's a little cut off there. The pink is prime rated ag soils, and the yellow is statewide rated ag soils. Those are just basically the soils that are good for growing crops and for growing food. So there's about 95 acres that are currently in active agricultural use, mostly cropped by Jasper Hill and Fairmont. And those soils are, there's a Verscher Lombard complex and some Buckland loam. So some really nice soils in the open land. But the majority of the property is forested. There's about 570 acres that are forested. And you can see in this map here, sorry, all the legends are cut off. At the bottom, you'd see that the green color is symbolized as being a highest priority connectivity block. And the upper forested piece that isn't colored in that way, that says Brassknocker on it, is still a priority connectivity block. So connectivity blocks, I know a lot of you know this already, but they're basically networks of contiguous forested parcels that allow for passage by plants and animals on a regional scale. So it's connecting biophysical regions in Vermont and to other states and to Canada. And those areas are really important right now, especially in the face of climate change, that we make sure that those areas are preserved for passage. So it's great that a lot of this land is conserved and will be carefully managed with those things in mind. So that's the property as a whole. That's all I really wanted to say about that. But you can see from this map that it's made up of a number of different parcels now. In 1987, Vermont Land Trust purchased this property, and over a number of years, subdivided and sold different parcels. Originally, I was looking through Cheryl's files from the steering committee, and it looked like there were about 18 different parcels that the steering committee had considered over that period of time. Today, there are 24 parcels with 20 different landowners, and it's conserved through the process of, when each of these properties was sold, the Land Trust actually wrote the conservation restrictions into the warranty deeds when that parcel was conveyed. It's a little different than what we do today, which is to record a separate document called a conservation easement in the land records that runs with the land forever. A couple of these properties do also have a conservation easement, but maybe no one cares about the distinction, I'm not sure, but just thought I'd point that out. Anyway, those restrictions include things like restrictions on subdivision of these properties, commercial, residential, and industrial development. There are requirements around the forest management plan for these properties being submitted to Vermont Land Trust for our approval prior to a commercial timber harvest. But there are other things memorialized in these deeds as well, like public fishing access along the Whetstone Brook. It's not in all of the properties, but it's in a number of them. And then some of these parcels are really very specific. In the northeast corner, that's the Craftsbury Community Care Center, so it's specific to senior housing. We have another property that's for the expansion of the cemetery in the village. There's another one that's specific to affordable housing. There are specific restrictions in one of these parcels where there's a historic horse barn. So it touches a lot of different interesting features and was trying to meet a lot of needs. It's also worth saying that when a number of these subdivisions went through, Cheryl had to go through the Act 250 process. And so a lot of those Act 250 restrictions are also written into these deeds. Okay. Patrick is going to give us a recent update, but I think it's great timing that Headwaters Community Trust put out a press release this week describing some work that my colleague Hannah has been doing with them related to the parcel that was earmarked for affordable housing. So, a lot of work is being done there to try to transfer to Headwaters, and it's just really excellent timing for this meeting, so wanted to share that as well. That's really my overview. I also brought a number of different articles that I found in our files, and it was a real interesting time capsule, especially now in the context of statewide conversations we're having about conservation goals through Act 59 and land use goals through Act 181 and its partial appeal. It's very cool to see how this project was described by members of the community and the Land Trust and kind of the media generally. This is a conservation project for sure, but it was also just a broader thing, a community planning project. And I really appreciate the way the steering committee tried to meet that balance. So that's all I've got. I do want to invite everyone to Vermont Land Trust's annual celebration, which is happening on September 15th at Highland Lodge, just in case I don't get the mic back. Here you go. Gripping that so tight.
Okay, and if we might, we can just leave that slide up.
Okay. Oh, I do have one more, sorry. You can't see that, but maybe we can leave that up because that shows all of the different landowners.
The originals.
Some
And
of them are
some.
still original.
Yeah,
Those are current.
we are.
Yes.
So I'm just going to quickly introduce now Cheryl Fisher is coming up, and Cheryl's getting the mic on, so I'm going to just talk loud. Cheryl is a biologist by training. She went on to earn her master's in medical technology, worked in hospital labs and American Red Cross Blood Bank in Burlington, and a second master's of science in community planning and natural resource management from UVM. In 1986, she joined the staff of Vermont Land Trust, and one of her first VLT projects was the Brassknocker Farm Project. She served the Vermont Land Conservation Committee for over 10 years before moving on to become the founding executive director of the New England Grassroots Fund, now just called the Grassroots Fund, where she served for 18 years. After retiring in 2014, Cheryl and her husband, Richard Montgomery Monty Fisher, moved to Plymouth, Mass, and then followed their daughter to Northern Virginia, where Cheryl remains very active in local conservation and civic engagement. As she says, citizen activism and community organizing is one of her happy places. And we are very happy to have Cheryl here to kind of give us the story of how all this came to be. So, thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me? Is this in the right place? Yeah. Good. So first of all, I would like to ask the fact checkers in the room to raise their hands. That is, how many of you were here when this project happened? How many of you were involved? That's what I thought, you see? So I don't have a lot of work I'm going to necessarily have to do from that perspective, because many of you have pieces of this history, and I'm going to ask you to join in adding your pieces if it's appropriate. So you're my fact checkers, and I want to thank you. I want to thank Kristen and the library for making this possible as well. And you know, the story of the preciousness of East Craftsbury, Greensboro, Craftsbury, Walden, this whole area, it's just so magical. And part of it goes back to, gosh, you know, 200, 150 years ago, but certainly when Miss Jean arrived, things around this part of the world changed. And this was Miss Jean's property that was purchased and put together probably by her father, and then she inherited it, and then the Rowells became the caretakers, and like her whole family, and so it was this really amazing community doing lots of things. In the late 1970s into the 1980s, farming in New England, probably the Northeast, was, beginning to be stressed. The small farms were really beginning to be stressed. And in the Northeast Kingdom, that was also true. And farmers would go to the local bank, mostly the Lyndonville Bank, and they would take out loans to do their work. And many of them sadly couldn't meet their obligations. And when they couldn't meet their obligations, the bank foreclosed, threatened to foreclose. This is the story, at least, that I know. But there was a part of that bank family, the Lushers, the Lyndonville Bank, where not only would they say, your loans are past due, we need to collect, and the farmers might say, we don't really have the money to do this. And so the bank would say, well, we can raise money by selling your farm. And the way they did it, Act 250 had already been, adopted, but it became, for many, I think a lot of you know, called the 10 plus 1 acre spaghetti lot loophole. So the farms would be divided up literally into these X number of feet along a roadway and all the way back to the property to include 10.1 acres. And once it did that, that was something that would get auctioned off. And that happened to tons and tons, not tons, a lot. I didn't go look up the numbers, but a lot. And I see Bruce back there. Bruce, you can tell us how abundant that activity was. This farm also sadly ran into financial challenges, and rumor had it that the Lyndonville Bank was going to come and auction it off in 10-acre spaghetti lots. And David Rogers, who is here, and Leslie Rowell, whom I do not see, called the Vermont Land Trust and said, help. We don't want to lose our village. We don't want to lose our heritage. We don't want to lose the treasures that we have here. Can the Land Trust come help us? And so Darby Bradley and Rick Carbon, who were chairing it at the time, said, sure, we'll send our newbie Cheryl up there. She doesn't know much of what she's doing, but she'll figure it out with you. I mean, this was like, I had only been working there for a year, so this was like as new to me as things are to you at this point. And I got here and we figured out we needed to create a steering committee. How many of you are in the room who were on that steering committee? Would you please raise your hands? So there are, a couple of you, thank you. And we had a steering committee, 11 people, people from Greensboro and Craftsbury. And we sat down, and for the first year, we walked the land, we looked at the land, we thought about the kind of concepts of conservation and forest practices and wildlife and all those variables, and had conversations about what would it mean to meet our obligations. So a couple of other things, I'm going to make these two quick. The Vermont Housing and Conservation Board came online on July 1st, 1987. So when we were faced with, the Land Trust was faced with finding $382,000 in 60 days, that's what the bank gave us, 60 days to find that money. We had to be quite creative, and Darby at this point said, well, it is June the 27th, so VHCB is coming online. They're brand new, they don't really have their systems up and running, but we'll go ask them to toss in a couple $100,000 and make this, help us make this happen. So that was one thing. And the other thing is my very quick story. The first time we had the steering committee meeting, or the community meeting on the 27th of June, David was out of town, and he let me stay at his house. And I had a 6-month-old, a 4-year-old, and a babysitter, and I brought them with me, and they were at David's house. I went to the meeting. Rob, Circus Smirkus was there. Rob was there, and he, made some reference to the circus. And I got home after that meeting, got to David's, and it's like 11:30 at night, and I'm crawling into bed. Everybody else is asleep, and I hear this, "Zeke, Zeke, where are you, Zeke?" And I went, "Oh my God, one of the circus animals has escaped. What's going on?" So I call up Rob at literally almost midnight and go, "Rob, has one of your animals from the circus, escaped?" And he said, "No." He said, "I only have my little dog. There are no animals in the circus." He said, "It's probably a coon hunter." And he said, "Don't worry about it." And I said, "Okay, I'll just relax." And he said, "But bring the kids down tomorrow for the dress rehearsal." So I got to see the first circus performance as a result of being asked to come here. VHCB came online, and here we were with this project that literally took phase 1 5 years, thanks to all of you. And it really, in part, came out of the pressures of turning too much land in the Northeast Kingdom into these spaghetti lots. And so the conversations went on. We figured that we wanted, and we were all very sensitive to all these grand Vermont visions of keeping our villages tight, the development around the villages, having public trails, managing the forest, doing all of those kinds of values. And that was all part of the discussion with these, with the project. And then we came up with a scheme of, well, we don't want to call it subdivision, that wasn't a very appropriate word for this situation, but someone said at that point, the conservation community was calling it green development. And I said, okay, well, we'll swallow that, but it's just that we do all these things, and then each person who looked at the potential of buying a piece of it, had conversations about all these dreams and values and visions for this property. And I know we have a landowner here, the two of you, who finally put a walking trail in. That was always, a vision. And when Eleanor Inouye was in the piece right across from David, that driveway there, she started the trail along Whetstone Brook, and we ended up, with the center across the road. We talked about affordable housing, and so we put that 30 acres aside. I'm sorry to all of us who at this point realize it's a little difficult to do the kind of housing we wanted to do, but we thought about saving a piece just for affordable housing. We thought about the trails. We thought about how it would be farmed. And it's fabulous. I mean, it's, as I say, it's made a beautiful place in this part of the world that honors all of you who have been here and those of us who came from away and now we're here. And Monty and I were lucky enough. The other story is, at the end of 5 years, there was one parcel. 3 serious parties had looked at it. They had put money down. They lost their money. They walked away. The end of the road parcel. And Darby said to me, "Cheryl, 5 years, you got to get out of there. We got to finish this project." And he said, "You go back and tell that steering committee that I'm going to fire you if you don't get them to figure out how to get rid of that last parcel of land." So many of you may wonder why the person who was sent up here to do the project luckily ended up with a piece of the project. The whole steering committee, when I said it to them that night, they in unison said, "You're going to buy it." And I went, "I can't do that. I'm a staff person." "Oh yeah, it's okay. We know all of the appraisers in the Northeast Kingdom who appraise really high, and we're going to hire a couple of them and we'll average that price and that's what you'll pay." And that's what we did. And luckily, that has allowed me and my family to become part of your community. So you may have questions. I've left out tons of things, but we'll bring it up in our conversation. Thank you.
kind of transition to something really cool that's going on right now on these lands. Patrick's here from the Memphremagog Watershed Association. Patrick Hurley lives in Newport and is the project manager at the Memphremagog Watershed Association, or MWA. At MWA, Patrick leads the identification, development, design, permitting, and implementation of water quality habitat restoration projects. Prior to joining MWA, Patrick spent a decade working as a consulting hydrologist, restoration ecologist, and wetland scientist in the western United States. I'm really excited to have Patrick here to also explain what's going on. You may have seen him or some of his coworkers playing around in the river at some point over the last few months, and you'll probably see more activity next year as things get going. We'll explain more. So thank you, Patrick, for joining us.
Sure. Is that loud? It seems loud. Sorry, you can't see the pretty photo. What was that? Is that better? Yeah, that'll have to do. Thanks, everybody. I'm Patrick with MWA. Thank you for having me. This is a beautiful spot. I love stained glass, so it's nice to be, in this venue with you all. So we are on contract with the Vermont Land Trust to do some restoration design work for primarily the Isaacson property within the Brassknocker Conservation Project. And here's our beautiful stream right there, up through the river corridor, up East Craftsbury Road. And so when we take on a project, a contract like this, we do a kind of soup to nuts, assessment, design, alternatives analysis, and then we come up with a plan for restoring the stream corridor, the wetlands, the habitat, the hydrology, primarily focused on sediment management, flood risk reduction, fish habitat, connectivity between the stream and the floodplain. And so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. If you don't know who MWA is, you should find out. I live in Newport, but our watershed goes all the way up to here. The Barton River, the Black River, the Clyde River, the Johns River all drain into Lake Memphremagog. Memphremagog is an international water body. 75% of the drainage is in the States, but 75% of the lake is in Canada. So that's a pretty neat little factoid. But we've been around. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary next year. I've been here for 5 years. I came back to Vermont after spending time out west and fell into the kingdom and never looked back. I like to tell people I took a wrong turn on I-91 and landed in Newport. But we do a lot of different work. So this is an example of some of our stormwater projects. We've done some in Newport. We did the rain gardens at the Glovertown office and all those nice little plantings and steps recently. This is in Barton Village. This is a stormwater management project. It takes 7 acres of drainage and treats it instead of it going straight to Willoughby Brook in the Barton River. We also work on lake shores. This is our another VLT property at Scotts Cove on Bluffside Farm in Newport. We took out a crazy amount of Phragmites, that really tall reed grass that takes over. We took out about 5 acres of it, and we put in place about 18,000 native bulrush plantings, which you see right there, half of which we actually collected the seed from the shores of Memphremagog and propagated the native stock and put them in, and it's looking really good. There's some before and after shots, all the desirable vegetation coming up, all the Phragmites gone. Here's some folks from Northwoods planting our bulrush. We do a lot of stream crossings, bridges, culverts. So this is an example of a 4-foot pipe on a 22-foot stream that we replaced with a nice big bridge. And so now there's way less erosion, way less flood risk, all the good stuff. Fish can get up it. Here's another example of some projects in Morgan and Holland and Valley Brook. So we do a mixture of infrastructure. That's a brand new box culvert. John Miller's been out here taking photos of this site over there on the right panel. It's now a fish and wildlife access area for fishing, hunting, trapping, whatnot. Old retired farm. They purchased it with VHCB help. The Nature Conservancy has an easement. Fish and Wildlife Department owns it outright, and it's 170 acres, and we've done all the restoration work to essentially retire the barnyard and reclaim, you know, the floodplains. And just up the road, this is actually last week, we just put in a big culvert in Holland on Valley Brook. So that's kind of a catchment scale restoration project, much like the Brassknocker property is kind of a catchment scale conservation easement. It's really neat. I didn't know you had 4 miles of stream, oh, same photo, 4 miles of stream corridor. So here it is, the whetstone, why we're here, right? So our project focus is really down here on Isaacson, Mary Lou Isaacson's section, before it kind of goes through the main stem by, I believe that is the true Brassknocker farm barn, right? The big one on the bank, okay. So, pardon my ignorance, I'm just a contractor. So this is 1962. We look back at a lot of historical imagery to help guide our kind of assessments and surveys and design plans, and you can see there's a river and some fields, not much to be seen. When you get closer with nice new drone imagery, you can really see what's going on. This is right along the road, obviously. This used to be a culvert. You can see the culvert. It's not a culvert anymore. We like to call it the beached whale. It blew out pretty dramatically. That's like a 4 or 5 foot pipe that's just suspended upside down. And so we've been tasked to essentially address this problem, try to maintain access to the hay fields by crossing the brook in some fashion that ideally doesn't involve a pipe or a bridge, right? Because they're prone to issues and they're expensive to maintain. So we're exploring kind of wet crossings like an armored ford where you kind of drive down, hit the river bottom. The river bottom has been armored with some big rocks, relatively smooth, so a tractor and whatnot could get across. And then buffer plantings and wetland restoration and ways in which we can improve fish habitat, ways in which we can reduce the erosion pressure on actually the embankment of East Craftsbury Road. There's a lot of cool, archaic messing arounds with the river that are still there. So this is my favorite feature on the property. This is like a granite walking bridge. Anybody know how old this has been? This is right behind the big yellow barn down the road. It looks old. So what I'm wondering, like, when I look at these things, I see, why did somebody build this? Way back in the day, the farmers weren't moving like 4-ton blocks of granite just to go on a jaunt, right? This is like to divert water into a mill and run a saw or run a grist mill or something. And then you got this beautiful hedgerow of granite blocks. And so I look at this, I'm like, I see channelization. Somebody was milling something here, and I want to know what, and I'm hoping Farley could tell us. She knows all the things, but she doesn't know. It was a what mill? Oat. Oat, okay. Answer. Awesome. Well, we've been looking at this because, you know, it's right next to the big, beautiful barn that's like 4 stories tall, and that's right in the river corridor, and it's subjected to water during the floods. And we don't want to take it out because it's beautiful, and the archaeologists and the cultural resources people are going to hang us, you know, from our, you know, ears if we do. And we don't want to restrict access, so we're kind of trying to work around those constraints, trying to work around the constraints of the river. We got the road right there. We got this big lower meadow wetland area. It used to probably be hay or in pasture, and it's been left fallow. And so, like, okay, well, it's clearly not a production zone anymore. It's pretty wet. It gets flooded a lot. There's always debris and silt and gravels coming down. So let's just reforest that big block in red. As you reforest the buffer, all that manure that comes off the hayfield has a chance to get soaked up, absorbed. You know, the nutrients don't make it quite as readily to the stream. When the stream does flood and the waters go through this meadow, my laser died. Oh, there it is. Woody materials, coarse stuff, big chunky pieces of wood, things on the ground, rocks on the ground, that slows flood waters down, that traps debris, that traps silt, traps sediment. All of that is good for the river because it reduces the velocity of the river. Roughness in a floodplain is ideal. You don't want a parking lot because that water there's nothing slowing it down. But if you've got a boulder field and a bunch of forested stumps and trees and branches slowing the water down, that is reducing the flood risk in the heart of the village, right? So we're trying to evaluate what can we do to reduce the flood risk, not only to the property, but also to the village itself. we have other constraints, like the Whetstone Brook Road has a pipe on it. That pipe is pretty big, but it's not as big as I would like to see. We have a 8-foot incision where the channel has essentially blown through that culvert embankment. Now there's 8 feet from the top of where the road used to be to the bottom where the channel is now. We got to fix that. But then we've got these really comforting sections of ledge and bedrock outcrop, where we know the river is not going to go down any further. It's hit the basement. It can't go further below the bedrock. So we use these sorts of pieces, and that's right upstream in the woods, maybe a half mile up the road, where it's like, okay, this is kind of our reference point. From here down to the Brassknocker farm proper, the river is locked into these two positions. So we got to work within the constraints. So we do a really detailed survey. This is my colleague Gabrielle. She's running a GPS unit that's talking to like 38 satellites on any given moment. And we essentially walk the brook, and we're measuring the pools and the riffles and getting below the water surface. And then we take those data, we make a terrain. We also use state LiDAR, which is collected from a plane, looking down with lasers, makes a heat map or an elevation map of the ground, but doesn't go through water. So that's why we're augmenting and going in the water and surveying the channel. We make this 3-dimensional model, right? And so then we can run water through the model, see how the flood responds, mess with the model the way we might propose a design or a crossing or a bridge or a floodplain project, and see what happens. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like in a video, because it's 2026 and we can do that sort of thing. So this is a 100-year flood from near Shadow Lake Road, but closer to Isaacson's farm, flowing along East Craftsbury Road towards the Brassknocker farm. That big gray chunk is that yellow barn right along the side of East Craftsbury Road. And I want to start at the beginning. So this is a 10 to 100-year flood. You can really see water's moving from bottom right to top left. It really starts to inundate. But I want you to look right there. That's that bottleneck, right? That's where that culvert used to be. And those red heats, those colors right there, that's like 15 feet per second flow. That is death, imminently, because you can barely stand up in 3 to 4 feet per second if you're knee or thigh deep. When it's 15 feet per second, it is a whirlpool, and you're not getting out of that. So just see as the flood recedes, you're still left with a lot of water in the floodplain, and the flows slow down, but that bridge that I showed you with the granite block, that's right there. That's that other constriction point. So you can really see right here, we have 2 constrictions, 1, 2. We can't really mess with that one because we don't want to put the barn at risk. But we can mess with that one. So that's kind of what we're working on, and we've got some very preliminary, so existing, lots of red. Red is bad. Red bad. That red's fine. That's just a hill or a terrace. That red bad. Much better, right? I'm going to go back and forth. Don't get dizzy. So you can see there's a little reduction in red. There's some different ponding going on. There's some different flow patterns. That's because we took out the road embankments where the culvert used to cross, and we turned it into like a low crossing, like a dip. Like, have you ever been down Swamp Road between Shadow Lake Road and Perrin Hill Road? You like cross the beaver swamp? Yeah, a couple of you know what I'm talking about. Just like that, kind of. And what happens is, like, this is a cross section of the flood, right? Left bank, right bank. That's the embankment that blew out. So that actually, someone pushed up a bunch of rocks so people don't drive off and land in the brook. But 8 feet per second at a 10-year flood, when we do our work upstream, or before we do our work upstream, we're seeing on a fully connected floodplain 3 feet per second. So floodplains are good. They slow water down. That's all we're trying to do up there. Oh, that's it. That's Swamp Road, Perrin Hill. So you might see us working in the brook next summer, and we will probably be building something that looks a little bit like this, where the hay balers and the tractors can get across the brook to do the farming, maybe manage some forests, get back across the brook when it's the appropriate time. So that's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Invite our presenters up to the stage. We'll pass this around maybe. Now's your time for any questions that anyone has on any of these topics. Sure.
I don't know if any of our presenters know this, but maybe one for the audience. I'm Jeremiah Church. We have one properties on the map. There is a mill on our property as well. And I'm curious if anybody knows what else was being milled. Maybe more boats. I don't know.
Someone told us once that it was maybe starch, that there used to be a lot of potatoes growing here for starch.
The little dam, it's below yours, and the other is probably was a sawmill, because it's fairly small. But the one in the village was on the map of 1870s, was an oat mill. Because people raised oats, a lot more Scottish in this area, so that was, I believe, there may have been another sawmill. There was actually a sawmill, other one too, if you go through the records in East Craftsbury.
Okay.
So a lot of the houses, like my house, built in the 1840s, was probably used those sawmills to make the lumber for the houses. But, cool. That's one thing good on the west side.
If anyone wants to come see it, it's really cool. Like, the way they stack these giant rocks for the corners of the building, God knows how long ago, and they're massive, and obviously did it without the equipment that we have today, and it's really fun to see.
Yeah, you basically make out 3/4 of the building and then the dam across the creek.
Where is your property?
So you
The map.
Our property is 636. There's a sign at the turn. And if you take a right where you see the 636 sign and you look for an rusty oil can on your right, that's our trail. And if you follow the trail, you'll get to the say.
You guys from that stone road down to the, or sorry, from the road down to the brook. Yeah. You go back there.
Anyone's welcome. You do a lot.
Yeah, we look. Claire's is pointing right there.
Oh, so they're down, way down.
Yeah, they're the next little last parcel on Western.
What's happening with forest management, or what activities are going on in the property that's forested?
Great question, Craig. Really like that, and I didn't even pay him. I'm gonna put this on. What's going on with the forested? A number of these parcels are enrolled in the current use program, have forest management plans. The Fuller property here, Fisher property, Andrews property, the Meyer property, Partridge Hills, the Box, and VLTs actually are all enrolled in the current use. Oh, and yours actually, yeah, because you enrolled it. So all those properties are enrolled in the current use program, have a forest management plan. There's been a long history of management on a number of these by the forester in the room, Ross Morgan. Now working with his son-in-law, Rick Morrill. I think most recently harvest here on Partridge Hills 2 years ago, or no, it was even last winter. People would have probably seen there was a pile of logs right as you were coming into East Craftsbury from Greensboro. They landed right in the hill here. So active management is going on across the bulk of the forest land that's here. And when you're enrolled in the current use program, you've got to be managing that land for forest products as one part of the program. And so the most recent management activities have been focused here. And I think the Box, they also had a more recent harvest as well.
Oh, yeah, they've been roasting for a couple of years.
So I think, right, these two properties have the most recent harvest, and then there's a long history of management down here as well. So I'd say a lot going on. It's kind of exciting. We actually had the folks working here 2 winters ago, I think. It's kind of blending a little bit. If it was actually last winter, were LaFoe Logging out of Orleans. And they have some really cool equipment that cuts the tree, processes the logs. It's called a cut-to-length processor, and then brings those logs right down to the landing. They also have done a lot of work throughout the Craftsbury Outdoor Center's trail system on both the Craftsbury Outdoor Center's land and adjoining properties. And so you might have seen those as you've been skiing around the last 3 years, 4 years. They've done a fair amount of work across the trail system in this area. So, other questions?
I think Cheryl skipped over the fact that she was very instrumental in making sure that the community care was able to be built on that parcel. It was just as we finished up the advisory board, was that correct? That we decided that that was going to happen? Can't remember the date.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the timeline, but it came up, I think, into year 3, year 4, that's what we would want to do. And then we had to work through all the processes to make that happen. So we'd have to go back to the files for remember.
How did that idea of a community care center come up anyway in this plan discussion?
Started with Carol Maroney.
Okay, right.
She brought the idea to the select board,
So she was involved with it from the beginning.
and she planned on building it on the Wild Ranch Road, which I didn't think was a good spot for it. I was working on the advisory board at the time, and so I was in talking with Cheryl. We offered that. This is history across the road. So.
Yeah, so I know Carol spearheaded that. I didn't know that she was involved from the very beginning. It's so cool. Another question I have, Cheryl, how many individual owners are still there, or their descendants are there, or relatives? Do you know that? I'm just curious. I mean, it seems like a lot are still on the property.
The Box were originals, and so the Box are still involved. We're an original.
The Fullers.
The Fuller portion, the next generation, 2 generations from the ones that started.
The Aikens.
Rogers, David.
The Goodby property has had several owners since they
Right.
Rowellsville.
David Rowell has 3 acres around the barn, so
Yeah.
on that list.
Isaacsons were original, I think. The Isaacsons.
Yes. Yeah, they're originals.
So at least, I mean, in my head, I think when we got through that first phase, the first 5 years, there were 20 landowners at that point. Do you remember in the files? So out of the 20, 5 are still originals, 5 or 6.
I just have a remembrance of the whole process back in '87. I was working for the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation. I live in Craftsbury, but my boss said to me, "You got to go to this meeting in East Craftsbury." So I was sent up as a state bureaucrat to talk about the historic character of East Craftsbury. And I remember vividly going up on the hillside that the Box owned and looking out and telling everyone, everything you see except for this church is from the 19th century in the barn. That's early 20th century, and everyone was just, holy mackerel. I mean, the fields and the way that the buildings were arranged, and it was just spectacularly beautiful from the historic preservation point of view.
Yep, and it still is.
Yeah, still is.
Yeah. I'm very lucky.
Question for Patrick, 2 questions. So how was MWA pulled in? Like what initiated the restoration project? And the other question is, where does MWA's funding, at least for this project, come from?
Sure. I'll give you one answer for both of them. Oh, yeah, so the Memphremagog Basin, because we have what's called a total maximum daily load requirement for phosphorus and sediment loading to Lake Memphremagog set by the EPA, the state has created a special pool of money specifically for our watershed to address that problem, right? So projects that can demonstrate a phosphorus reduction, sediment reduction benefit can apply to this program for funding to design, permit, and implement, stream projects, wetland projects, forest road projects, stormwater management projects, anything that can reduce stormwater runoff, erosion, that sort of thing. So we sit on the Basin Water Quality Council as a watershed association with many other players, and we help evaluate and recommend awards to grant applicants, right? So VHD actually happens to also be our grantor. VLT applied for funds to address that culvert, among other things, and then we recused from voting because we were like, well, we want to design that project, so we'd like to bid on the work. And so all the other members voted to approve the project, and then VLT invited us to submit a proposal to develop the plan, and so we were selected to lead that plan development. So I think technically we got a contract like December, but couldn't really get out and do any work until April. So we've gone out, we've done, the wetlands delineation, the survey, the stream geomorphic assessment, we've done some hydraulics, as you see, with developing our preliminary plan. Hopefully have everything wrapped up and permits, drafted around like March. Maybe we can get funding approved, like February for implementation phase based on progress we've made before then, and then hopefully implement the work next summer and fall. Sure, yes.
There's a preamble to that rather than a footnote, and that is the landowner who abuts the stream, Mary Lou Riley, the White House, was very, very committed to doing her part to honor the easement and the protection of the barn as well as her house. And right after the first flood, she and I had some long conversations about what it would take to get into the queue to get that work done, and how assertive she had to be first with the Vermont Land Trust to convince them that it wasn't, just protecting her little backyard or the basement of her house, which had flooded, which was a real problem, but that she really wanted to make sure that the barn was protected. So we need to thank Mary Lou for her assertiveness in making that happen.
And are you looking at what's upstream of the particular project site that you're working on now as part of?
We have walked portions of upstream from our project limits. Our contract is very specific to that section of the river that I showed you. I have noticed that the town's replaced the culvert on Shadow Lake Road right at the junction, which is a good improvement. Upstream, we haven't seen any major problems as you go up. I haven't gone beyond the Shadow Lake intersection, but that forested stretch, as you're looking down below East Craftsbury Road, looks really great. There's a lot of development that's happened on West Oak Brook in the heart of the village of East Craftsbury. The barn is built on a giant granite block abutment, right, in the embankment, and that's not going anywhere. And the river's made of ledge right there, so the river's not going down, and it's held up to some pretty serious floods the last couple of years, so they built it well. So we're working within the limits of what our project scope is. But in general, we do have a separate grant, the Watershed Association, for project development and identification in the Barton and Black River drainages. So you may have seen us walking all over Seaver Brook and Whitney Brook, and all the brooks come into Albany off of the Lowell Mountains, and so we're looking at a lot of those drainages where there's just a lot of high energy flooding, meeting really critical pinch points on super old roads that were probably just horse and buggy paths that got turned into double lane truck roads. So.
Well, that flooding took out East Craftsbury Road. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that was related to West Oak Brook.
Dixon bought property? Shadow Lake Road, yeah.
Well, it was East Coast Dam, that was.
No, but it took out like East Craftsbury, too.
Yeah.
In between Village and Charlotte Road, it took out like a lane east.
I don't doubt it, yeah. We see evidence of it. There's a lot of road gravel in the floodplain from the road.
Yeah, that's what I was asking, because
A
like.
big chunk of that is because of that culvert, right? It clogged, and then it made a huge reservoir of water, and then it blew out. And so before it blew out, it went to the right, and down East Craftsbury Road, and then went right down the center of the stream and turned that culvert upside down. I can't believe how well together that granite footbridge and that little flume. I know they patched the flume up together, but geez, like the amount of water that came out in one go. And it took out Whetstone Brook Road too, right? That culvert got reset, so. And that's a big constraint. Like, we can't really do anything as BLT and we can't really do anything about Whetstone Brook Road's culvert. But that's like, if ever we're gonna do anything next, it'd be that.
Is that
So-
a town
That's a new
Greensboro?
culvert.
That's a town, that's a town.
That's a town in Greensboro.
That's a new culvert.
Oh, I bet, only 7 feet, but that river's, 18.
I know, I mean, it was much smaller before the first
Oh, it was?
two
Oh,
floods.
okay.
Oh, yeah,
Good enough.
yeah.
No.
And so it went out, and then the next year washed out a little more, and then
Yeah.
the one that's there is brand new.
It's right here first.
Yeah, and I have a question. I live on East Craftsbury Road, and this culvert that you've probably been talking about before you get to Shadow Lake Road, the one that can't handle the water the last 2 floods, and then it floods over, and then it goes down the side of the road, takes out my driveway, and keeps on going. Now, that's fine, because they'll come and they'll fix it in 3 or 4 days. But that's fine too. But more important, they put in that fancy new culvert up on Shadow Lake Road. That fancy brick, concrete. It's a nice culvert, it's a dandy. But the boys expect it for a volume of water that's greater than the culvert down by my house.
Yeah.
So all of us, not all of a sudden, but now more water is going to go through and impact that little old culvert at my house, so to speak. And I don't see anybody doing anything about making the downstream culvert bigger than the upstream culvert. I mean, it only makes sense, to me. I mean, there was a nice culvert there before they put the road through. It was granite. It was a granite square block, culvert. And it worked fine and then, they put in
We
the
could
round.
probably talk about culverts for a whole series. Today we are going to focus a little bit back in here. There's one specific project related to Whetstone Brook. We won't expand beyond the entire culvert inventory of Greensboro and Craftsbury. If you do, I know you're in Greensboro, so you can't talk to Bruce, but anyone in Craftsbury, you can talk to Bruce about the select board.
Well, anyway.
So that, David, you had a question too, right?
This is not totally relevant, but it's a curiosity. How did Whetstone Brook get its name? Was the geology of the stone underlying it's metamorphic, but mostly limestone. Anybody who has water in East Craftsbury knows there's a lot of lime in the water. But was that good stone for making whetstones for sharpening? I don't know, does anybody know that history?
I couldn't catch part of what David was saying, but not all of it.
Oh, how did Whetstone Brook get its name? Was the stone in the brook good for making sharpening stones?
Yes, I got 2 short stories to tell you. Yes, when I got here 4 years ago or so, I went up Whetstone Brook and are you ready? Story time. I went up Whetstone Brook looking for a whetstone. And I remember my grandfather had a box of whetstones. Some of them were commercial and cover on them. And some of them were kind of just looked like stone that had been used. So I found out that this stone was a quartzite. It's originally a sandstone, and the size of the sandstone pieces in it vary greatly in the bedrock in different places. But I had heard the story that Ann Wilson told that people used to come, and there was a butcher who lived in New York City, and he would come up in Whetstone Brook Gorge, below the waterfall, and pick pieces up that were fairly squared. And he had some way of smoothing out one side of them, and he sold those in New York City to other butchers. So I went looking, and I found some pieces, and I have some pieces, and Ann Wilson was intrigued enough that she gave me her father's whetstone for sides. And it's about 10 inches long, and it's got 2 deep grooves in it from sharpening on both ends of that stone. It's a beauty. I've used it, and I used the one that I got. So they work.
There was a manufacturer of whetstones in Walcott Village, and this was one of his sources.
I heard up in Burlington, or is that area, where there was a Native American area, that in that brook, it's like somebody threw away a lot of whetstones in the brook, but that's way up, maybe a different geology.
It's a fairly large whetstone quarry out above Willoughby, on the road up towards East Charleston, behind me. And you still have beautiful, beautiful whetstones made of pumpkin stone, and they work very well. And it was a substantial size quarry. So whetstone quality is in the area.
Can I just ask a question? Cheryl, about the 30-acre housing piece. I'm just curious again about the history. Could you recount how that 30 acres became set aside for housing, and then how it's changed? And when you set aside that acreage, why didn't you put it closer to the village so it'd be more walkable for cities? So I'm just curious about how that all came to be.
I think that the real honest, direct answer was it was 30 acres sitting over there alone, and the notion was that one or more, maybe 2 houses could go in that would be modest and provide a little bit of housing. I don't think that was not one of our deeper moments of thinking, was it? It was there, and that was before we thought about walkable villages. We wouldn't do it today, but yeah.
Thank you.
Well, with that, we're a little over 7, which is when we said we'd stop. But I appreciate everyone coming tonight, and appreciate the library and Kristen for coordinating this, and Tom for your help in recording it, and the church for hosting us, and for all of our speakers as well. So please, give a round of applause and thank you for presenting.